So, one of the things that I will openly acknowledge and admit that I regret is not so much going into movies and film like I would like to. Mainly the reason I've avoided it, if you could even call it that, is simply just because I've been trying to get talent from the industry to interview. And don't get me wrong, because of my track record, the group's track record, we don't have to worry about a lot. You know, we're not the Logan Paul, Jake Paul type. And I couldn't be more different from people like Mexican Andy and Johnny Sumali. Terrible human beings for attention. Or act like we don't acknowledge negativity and faults. But it's been a chore. However, with the 2 cent aisle on this show, that gives me a unique opportunity to kind of sort of redo things. So we're going to go someplace dark today. We're going to be discussing Adolescence in 20 minutes or less. Now, before people roll their eyes and groan, when I say adolescence, I don't mean motherfuckers who haven't hit puberty yet. I'm referring to the Netflix show that was released last month, I believe. Very small cast, but extremely technical and extremely good writing. And even the youngest of the actors on here come across as seasoned veterans of their craft, which I feel like if you still got all your baby teeth in your mouth in this career field, that's usually a good thing and a good sign. So I can't give away too much, and I also can't use too much footage. I'm sure there's a disclaimer on the screen, but for those of you who aren't going to see it, because I'm going to put this on so many other forms of media. Even if Netflix gives me permission, that doesn't mean someone else in production, a director or something, can't see this. Or because I didn't say something that was extremely favorable for somebody inside of this particular critique, review, whatever you want to call it, or praise really, of this show, they can repeatedly flag the video down. Angry Joe's gotten it the worst. I think in one occasion he had something taken down over 10 times. Yeah, I'm not about that life. I'm gonna do it once, and I'm just gonna turn off monetization. And if I had to put it back up again, I'm gonna do it, and you won't be able to fuck with it at that point. But let's not stay on a negative point, but this will be some dark material. The easiest way I can describe this plot is to think of what would happen if, quite literally, we ended up in a situation where 99.9% of children fell for Andrew Tate bullshit. They believe that the other sex is nothing but out to get them, take from them, or they only care about you if you're shallow, rich, and famous. Things that their parents didn't teach them, they didn't get through cultural osmosis, they're getting from the internet. Essentially, it's just another story of this is what happens when you don't monitor your kids' logic and what they're absorbing from the internet. But it's done in such a unique way that you can honestly empathize with a lot of the parents and adults in this show. Because you have to remember, the adults, depending on the episode, but largely the impact of the show is not with them. Because for the most part, they're always playing catch up with what the kids know. The main character, Jamie Miller, is as normal of a UK kid as you can get, at least as far as I know. He goes and hangs out with his friends. He likes traditional stuff that anybody in his age group would like: video games, cute girls, social media. Until one day, without any form of psychological or mental issues that we know of, and not coming from an abusive household where his parents don't care about him or he didn't have a sister, a switch goes off. And Detective Bascom, if I'm saying that name right, essentially has to put the pieces together as to why little Miller did what he did. Also, one of the technical aspects I like about the show is that there are almost no cuts. Almost everything that you will see per episode is long scenes. In fact, if I'm counting correctly, in the first episode, there were only 3 transitions. So it was just 3 scenes. When I say they do long shots, I mean that cameraman made his money that day. In fact, if there's an award for technical filmmaking or something relating to camera operation, I don't know who you are, but good sir and or madams, I hope you all get your accolades. Now, Eddie Miller, his father, because I know that's going to come up in some way, shape, or form, or it's in the back of your head, is a humble plumber. 3 or 4 bedroom house, 2 kids and a loving wife. He couldn't have a more established, plain existence. This is not the type of man you expect to raise, well, a heinous child like Jamie Miller. Like I said, up until that point, as far as we know, if you're looking at the first episode or at a genuine synopsis, you don't expect Jamie Miller to do the terrible thing that he does in this show at all. His father obviously is one of those more stern but soft-handed gentlemen. He'll talk to you peacefully, but if you cross him too many times, he's allowed to go off like any other man would. Now, on the opposite side, when it comes to the people playing catch-up, which is mostly the adults, Detective Luke Bascom and Detective or something relating to Detective, I think her title was DS, Misha Frank, or Detective Frank, essentially know what happened before they even show up. But then you get these situations where you can see them talking to each other and wondering what can cause something like this, because they, as trained professionals, seasoned veterans, don't even understand what's triggered this. And that's crazy to think about, because from an audience perspective, they're basically saying what I would be thinking if we saw something like this on the 7 o'clock news. Because it's one thing when it's, someone who grew up abused, broken by the system, uncared for. But it's another when you see someone who couldn't have a more cush lifestyle as far as children are concerned. And I get it. In fact, Detective Bascom is even a father. He doesn't have the best relationship with his child, but it's not really stated, but it's almost implied through verbal and nonverbal communication. He wants to better his relationship with his son because he doesn't even remotely want anything like this to happen to his son or because of his son, especially if he feels like, he could prevent it. In fact, just through sheer coincidences, his son had some of the same classes as Jamie Miller did. It is a dark show. They have some of the best camera work I've ever seen. When someone speaks, people aren't magically jump cutting every 5 seconds. The camera is just going to slowly pan, or they were already in the scene, but there's more emphasis put on them. And they did one of the main things that I've never liked that Hollywood is obsessed with. So, I hate to get a little bit technical with you, but I'm going to try to put something on screen. There's these types of lenses that essentially really shouldn't even be utilized, but Hollywood loves them. They're called anamorphic lenses. Now, I know what you're thinking. You shouldn't say because you have a personal grudge against a device that they shouldn't be used, but you hear me out. I'm not saying it because I have a personal grudge against them. I'm saying them because based on how technology works and where we are, they should essentially be made obsolete. An anamorphic lens essentially makes the center point of a camera the focal point, but it also creates a blur around that outer circle of that focal point. So imagine, if you will, hold something in your hand, something spherical, and then in your mind create another sphere around it, another sphere around it. Only that center is what's in focus, 360-degree motion on that flat plane, and everything else is going to blur. Well, here's the thing though. If I have to get multiple people in a shot, you got cameras who have a smaller millimeter starting. So for example, if you want to do landscape photography, one of the biggest standards of the prime lenses is something called a 16 millimeter lens. 16 millimeter is meant to put multiple objects or people in focus across a wide plane. Let's say like 16 by 9, when the screen is longer on the left and right side than it is north and south, for those of you trying to visualize this. But when you want to do something for, an individual, or you want something that is, very easy to keep in frame, you go up a little bit. That's when you get the ones that are like 24 millimeters that can go over into 70. The higher the millimeters, the further it can zoom and, see things from a distance. And this is me just speaking plainly about it in plain English. So when you use anamorphics in scenes like that, on people, especially if they're tall, almost half or more of their body could be blurred out, even if they're not supposed to be, or it's distracting. Because you have to remember, these anamorphic lenses are primarily used for feature-length movies. So if I'm on a giant big screen or a big TV, I'm going to notice that there's certain things that aren't in focus, that don't need to be out of focus on the person speaking. I don't mean the background. I mean the actual individual speaking. That, to me, seems like it is unnecessary. And in fact, that might be why we have so many cuts. Because if someone's speaking and I change the targets, instead of slowly changing the focus to them, especially if they're only going to say one thing and having a back and forth exchange, why not just get a 16 millimeter, pull it into maybe 24 millimeters or 20 millimeters, just have them both in focus and blur out and focus out the background. Not to mention, if you want to still create the anamorphic effect, we have filters, we have computer generation, and traditional video editing and programming software that can aid and support in creating it. But this particular show, if they're using anamorphics, I have rarely noticed. The things that should be on focus when someone is speaking, like the actual person, they're fully in focus. The background is not in focus. Not, here's the head of the person speaking, and maybe when you get to their collarbone, everything else is blurred out to an extreme degree. But again, I know that some people could see that as a personal gripe, but for me, I don't. Now, as far as some standouts of the cast, obviously it goes to the lead antagonist, or I guess main character would be better, and that would be Jamie Miller. I feel like this kid has the potential to be the next Peter Parker. His range that he has to go through in this show, and the speed at which he transitions into it, and the fact that he's so good at controlling it, is truly something to marvel at. Because you have to remember, this is a child who's coming to the realization, not so much that he's in trouble, but he made a giant mistake, and he's permanently ruined how he perceives himself in the view of females, and how females may view him for the rest of his life. And every time he starts thinking about that, you see the small, innocent, tween 13 or 12-year-old boy fade away into the background, and you see a broken mess of a person trying to figure out if they're a monster or a person. You can see his regrets. You can see his anger, his rage, and his random needs to feel like someone can actually be attracted to him and love him that isn't his parents. And he's one of the only characters in the entire show that gets to show, no pun intended, that emotional range, but also transitioning into it. Honestly, I do want to see how his career grows. He is well trained. I don't know where he went to acting school, but he is well trained. Now, as far as the other cast members, because Owen Cooper, who plays Jamie Miller, isn't the only standout. Like I said, everybody else plays their characters to a T. But when you see them start to show what's broken or what's wrong with the characters individually, you start to realize very quickly that no one likes the situation that they're in, but they're putting on a brave face, or they're broken because they think they've done something wrong, despite no one having control of the internet. And best believe, Andrew Tate logic, manosphere bullshit, the 80-20 rule or the 20-80 rule, whatever you want to call it, it all leads to the same place, ignorance and destruction. But you can tell that so many people outside of the children don't seem to understand why this happened, or that it could go to this level. Even the children that know things like this happen, they didn't know it would go to this level. It is a dark story. There are no heroes in this story. This story is only about people doing terrible things to each other because we can't get along. And the worst part is, the adults have no way of truly stopping it, because by the time they found out, it was already too late. I don't know if a show like this can or will get a second season, or if they could flip it for the second season and do a female psychopath monster to a male innocence. But this is one of the few times where I've seen a show that was truly dark and disturbing and thought to myself, I'm sad that the ride's over. Parents, if you see this, you have a child under 16, I'm not telling you to sit down and talk to them so they can't turn into a Jamie Miller. I'm telling you, force them to watch at least one episode a day. Force them to. Now, I know it may reinforce some stereotypes or some negative thoughts that it's more common for females to deal with, but honestly, I want to be the first to tell you that people like this are preventable. They're preventable. They are terrible human beings. That is not a lie. What they do is terrible. That is not a lie. But they don't start like that. And it's not exclusive to males. It's not exclusive to female children. Anyone can snap or go down that road. We don't always know where our breaking points are. Being angry, having your emotions riled up via incitement is not the same as something picking at parts of your brain over a long period of time and you snap. In fact, for those of you who are unaware, it's a very common, I forget what the medical term for it is. It's very common for people who are going in what we would call, that has colloquially been nicknamed blind rage, to literally not remember what they did, but know they did it after they've done it and calmed down. Adolescence is a cautionary tale about what happens when we keep forgetting to love and respect each other as human beings, and the monsters we create, and we don't stop until it's too late. And not because of negligent parenting, but because we don't communicate properly with each other. And then you throw some manosphere bullshit in there. It's a powder keg inside of a fucking volcano, man. Owen Cooper, my hat is off to you, good sir. And honestly, I think they found the perfect Eddie Miller, which is Jamie Miller's father, in Stephen Graham. Because the few times I've met some of my friends' parents when I got older, just out in the wild, and every so often I come across one that told me that everything was going fine until, and Stephen Graham perfectly translates those parents to the point where I was thinking about, if I had a time machine, how I would go back and try to help them help their children stop before they did something that ruined their future. Because not every time you ruin your future, you know you're going to do it, and sometimes you don't know you've been trained to do it. Fuck Andrew Tate, fuck Manosphere, fuck incels, fuck wincels, fuck anybody who doesn't want to understand or try to understand one another. If you don't have empathy, a part of me is never going to truly respect you. You can pretend you have empathy, but to actually have it, I feel like should be treated like a life skill, not an expectation. So yeah, that's just all I wanted to say. See you around the Tucson aisle. Peace.